Hovin Soid HaMegillah. What was Mordechai up to with Haman? Why he didn't bow? What was he trying to accomplish? And what was given over to Esther? So I want to start with some questions. Mitoich these questions, we'll get to the Omek Davar, which I'm going to give Rashi Prokim. The mice is like this. The story goes that Mordechai doesn't bow, and the Avdei HaMelech, Asher B'Shar HaMelech, asked Mordechai, Madu'a ato oiver es mitzvahs HaMelech. No answer is recorded. Instead, we find that they tell him this every day in, day out. And they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordechai's words will be last, because he had told them that he's a Yehudi. So on the one hand, it seems like he didn't give any answer. On the other hand, it seems like he did give an answer. He told them that he's Yehudi. But the text offers us this answer only in this elliptic kind of way, that when it starts narrating the plan of the other Avnei Melech going to report to Haman, then it mentions that Mordechai had told them that he's a Yehudi. So which one is it? Did he answer them that he is a Yehudi? If he answered them that, why doesn't it record it? And if he didn't answer them that, then why does it say that he had told them that? Furthermore, significantly, this speaking to Mordechai day in and day out, trying to induce him to do something that he wouldn't do, parallels the story of Yosef, where it says, "Vayikedaber el Yosef yom v'lo shama elecha," the same terms. And there Yosef rises to power eventually, and he becomes the Mishnah. He rises in the Merkevas HaMishnah. They call him, for him, Avreich. And all the parallels between Yosef and Mordechai, which we don't have to go into. And of course, it's parallels to Yosef and Esther as well. And they're some from the same family. Okay, of course, V'hadvorim Atikim. Now, significantly, in the Yosef narrative, when she tells Yosef, Shichba imi, Yosef does respond, and how? He goes on and on. Vayimo'ein, and he says, Hein adoni lo yoda itik me'babayis, v'chol asher yesh lo nasam biyodi, etc. Ein god b'bayis meni, v'lo chosach meni umakim ato esav asher tishlei ve'ich esa. So he goes on and on and on. And the biggest question we have there is, why does he keep on talking? Why is this such a long speech? And the answer is because Yosef is flawed there, and that he's a marbet dvarim, as I explained in Parashat Vayeshev, and that's exactly the problem. That he should have not answered her, or just said one word answer. No. Instead, he gives her a whole long pshatel, why it would be wrong. So the next thing you know, Vayikedaber eleha, kedaber elav yom v'yom. So she says, okay, thank you very much. That was a great conversation. Let's pick up tomorrow. And every day she continues the conversation, and that's the problem. It would have been better off had he ignored her. So then, okay, then we look at the Mordechai story. Is he doing the right thing by keeping quiet? Maybe he's not answering them. But yet, it seems like he did give them an answer, because a few psukim later we find out that he had told them that he's a Yehudi. So on the one hand, it seems like silence is important. Silence is golden. And due to the parallel to Yosef, we're waiting for someone to just not respond to the seduction of the nations among which we are maybe stuck, might be exiled. On the other hand, it does seem like Mordechai did in fact answer. Okay, another question about speech is that in the previous parak, that's parak Beis of the Megillah, it says that Esther wouldn't say which nation she's from because Mordechai had told her not to say. Now that is odd, because how does the fact that he told her not to say justify her not saying? Meaning, he must have had a reason for telling her not to say. So the Megillah should have told us why Mordechai told her not to say, and that's why she listened. Instead, it says, you know why she didn't tell him? She didn't divulge her nationality? Because Mordechai had told her not to. So the question is, that's just begging the question of why not? Okay, that's another question. And notice also, Esther doesn't say her nation. In middle, we have this story of, because she listens to Mordechai. And then we have the story of Mordechai overhearing Big Son Seresh and him telling something to Esther, and she retells it in the name of Mordechai. And then we have Mordechai Higid Lahem Ashehu Yehudi. And again, it says Haman was decided he's going to take revenge against the nation of Mordechai. So what Esther does not say which nation she's from. There's an intermediate story where Mordechai is Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech, and he picks up and he has some information. He tells it and she tells it, and then there's the story of him telling which nation he's from, but again in this elliptical kind of way. So I want to explain to you what's going on over here, and then we'll understand also what Mordechai is not bowing to Haman is about, which the text doesn't tell us. Why is he not bowing? The pasuk says that Mordechai was Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech. Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech, and that's when he overhears Big Son and Seresh. Chazal tells he knew Shivim Lashonis. Shivim Lashonis is the Sha'ar HaMelech. It's a gateway to God, and that's why he's called Pesach Ko, gateway to Hashem. Also, associated with Babel, the gate of God, is where this language. Now, why is language the gate to God? Why is it Pesach Ko? Why is it Sha'ar HaMelech? Why is it Babel? Because even when people lose access to the order of Hashem, and I'm using order in the sense of the concept of reality that's rooted in Yud Kei Vav Kei, even when you lose that, there's a path back to it through the 70 Lashonos. And let me explain to you what that means. 70 Lashonos does not mean 70 languages, it means 70 ways of thinking, as I explained in my book of Mishnas Yaakov and elsewhere. And 70 ways of thinking means that there are 70 orders. Again, when I say order, I mean to say a concept that orders all of reality, a notion, a paradigm, a way of thinking about reality. And there are 70 of those. And then there's one, rarefied one, that's called Yud Kei Vav Kei. In what sense is it different than all the other ones? That's, of course, the million-dollar question. But we're not going to go into that now. But there's a fundamental difference. He's not just another God. But there are, in fact, 70 ways of thinking about the world. That's 70 gods, 70 personality types, and 70 languages. Languages meaning different ways of using speech. Now, Mordechai, as we know, knows 70 languages. Okay, why is that important? Because this is what Mordechai's mission is about. Mordechai's mission is the following. He is living in the time where we lost our ability to speak. I mean to say is that we lost prophecy. And prophecy is, of course, associated with the holy tongue. Prophecy is the word of Hashem. And if we lose prophecy, because we're not in Eretz Yisrael, we're in exile, then we don't have the language of Hashem. We don't have the word of Hashem. And I want to show you in the Megillah, before we get to what Mordechai's plan is, I want to show you how in the Megillah we can see that there's a question of whether the Jews have language or not. Because it says in the beginning of the Megillah, in first parak, that they sent letters to every Medina, and Am v'Am Kichsav of Chilashona, and they didn't send to the Jews. Only later, when the rule was issued that the Jews could defend themselves, then they sent ve'el ha'Yehudim kichsav v'chilashonam. So all of a sudden, the Jews become a people with their own language. So I want to read this Megillah as an attempt. The story of Mordechai and Esther is this attempt to reinstate the language of Yehudis. By the way, the language is called Yehudis in Sefer Malachim. So the ish Yehudi, what he wants to reconstruct Yehudis. Yehudis, the language, is the language of the words of Hashem. And when we lost the order, we lost the kind of construct of the world, understanding of the world that's rooted in Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is to say we lost Nevuah. The only orders that we're familiar with are the 70 Lashonos. And in order, but here's the key thing, we can reconstruct the order of Yud Kei Vav Kei through engaging in the Shivim Lashonos. If you want to understand how we do that, you read my book, Mishnas Yaakov, Sachel Akinim. I have some other essays about it. How we can find a truth that lies beyond the familiar truths, the ungodly familiar truths, by putting together all the 70 ungodly truths. Okay? So Mordechai's Yoshev B'Sha'ar HaMelech means his mission is, he's sitting in this most cosmopolitan place in the empire, the Sha'ar HaMelech, where everyone gathers from multiple places, and he's going to put back the word of Hashem. He's going to reconstruct it out of the conglomerate of all the nations and all the languages that he's doing. This is the mission of Mordechai. Okay. Now, so you see that speech is very important here, and in order for the Jewish people to have to have nationhood, they have to reassert their speech. Why am I saying they didn't have nationhood? Because it says in Parak Aleph that they sent letters to every Am v'Am, but they didn't send the Jewish people. So apparently the Jewish people were not even considered an Am. So why are the Jewish people not considered an Am? Well, if they lost their identity, which is rooted in their language, which is rooted in Yud Kevavke, because they lost Shashras Hashchina. So if they lost that and they're assimilating among the people, then they are no longer their own Am. It's only when Mordechai reasserts his Yehudiness, and Esther eventually reasserts her own Jewishness, that they become an Am again. And notice that Haman has this kind of statement, which if you analyze it, it's actually illogical. He says there's an Am Echad Mefuzah Mefor Bein Ha'amim. So on the one hand, he defines an Am as being having a spatial geographical component because it's Bein Ha'amim B'chol Medinas Machusef. On the other hand, there's this Am Echad that he is acknowledging that it's an Am, but it's not really an Am because Mefuzah Mefor it. But that's after Mordechai pressed that button of insisting that he's Yehudi and he is an Am. That's where the tension begins. Haman starts accepting that maybe they're an Am, but they're a problematic kind of Am, which we don't want to accept this. Okay, but the point I'm bringing out is that Yehuda is pushing for a Jewish nation. Mordechai is pushing for Jewish nationhood rooted in Jewish language, Yehudis. Now let's go back to that pasuk. Let's talk about the second question I asked. That it says that Esther is not telling her nation because Mordechai told her not to. The question is, how is that a reason? How does that justify that she's not saying? Because now we're just left wondering, why did Mordechai tell her not to? The answer is as follows. There's a big theme in the Megillah, who's in charge, man or woman. Parak Aleph asserts a decree that the man rules in his house. This is overturned throughout the Megillah because Esther ends up leading Achashverosh by the nose. Parak Aleph decrees that the man has to speak the language of his wife. That the wife has to speak the language of her husband, and that's the language they speak. And in the end of the Megillah, we find Achashverosh sending out letters in the language of his wife, Esther. Okay. Of course, Vashti refuses to come when she's invited, and Esther comes when she's not invited. So there's a whole overturning and undermining of the story here going on. Similarly, we have the same dynamic regarding Esther and Mordechai. Mordechai commands Esther when to speak, and the pasuk says, as we mentioned, Esther doesn't say which nation she's from because Mordechai told her not to. And the pasuk says, "Ves ma'amar Mordechai Esther osa." She would listen to the words of Mordechai. Then Mordechai says, "Okay, now you have to start speaking. You can no longer be silent." And she says, "Fine, go fast for me." And she tells him what to do. And there it says, "Vayavar Mordechai vayaski chol asher tzivsa alav Esther." Now Esther is calling the shots, and indeed she's no longer passive. She asserts herself and walks into Achashverosh unsummoned. And the Megillah ends with Ma'amar Esther Kiyam. So there's Ma'amar Mordechai telling Esther what to do, and eventually Ma'amar Esther is what upholds everything. So everything shifts. The power shifts from the man to the woman. So now, going back to this cryptic pasuk, Esther didn't say which nation she's from because Mordechai told her not to. So we said, but how does that explain why she's not saying which nation she's from? The answer is as follows. In order for Esther to have a nation, there has to be Jewish identity. In order for there to be Jewish identity, there has to be Jewish speech, because Jewish identity is the ability to speak the Dvar Hashem. Esther cannot re-establish Jewish speech that has been undermined through the exile and through loss of Asur Shashchina, because she follows the speech of Mordechai. Because in as much as Mordechai tells Esther when to speak and when not to speak, she is not able to be the one to reassert Jewish identity. So Esther doesn't say her nation because Mordechai tells her what to do, which means, therefore, Esther doesn't have a nation, because whether she wants to be Jewish or not is not up to her, and therefore she can't bring back her Judaism by virtue of speaking it. She's waiting for Mordechai. Okay, and now we are also waiting for Mordechai. So now we understand what Mordechai is trying to do. He's sitting Bishar HaMelech, and we expect Mordechai to bring back Jewish speech. So what happens? The people say to him, Madua ato iveres mitzvahs HaMelech. Now, of course, they speak to him in one of the 70 languages. Mordechai's language is a language that nobody knows. In fact, it's a language that doesn't really exist yet. He's trying to reconstruct it through collecting all these languages. Therefore, he doesn't respond, because Melech in his language means something different than it means in any of the 70 languages. It means Hashem. They wouldn't understand it. So he doesn't respond, but his non-response is itself asserting that he's a Yehudi, that he has a language that none of them have. And therefore, the Megillah on the one hand doesn't tell us what his response is. On the other hand, it suggests that he had told him that he's Yehudi, because his non-response is based on the fact that he's Yehudi and he can't talk any of their languages. Okay, and notice also that once Esther tells him what to do, it says, Vaya'avar Mordechai. So they accuse him, Madu'a to'ivers mitzvahs HaMelech. And eventually he was in fact over, as Chazal say, he broke the law of the Torah, by fasting on Pesach because Esther is commanding what to do. So the Melech is truly Hashem. He won't be over the mitzvahs HaMelech, therefore he won't bow to Haman, because bowing to Haman, because he needs to assert difference from Haman, he has to assert Yehudiness, and he's not bowing to Haman as his way of asserting his Yehudiness and bringing back Yehudis, the language Yehudis, which is rooted in Hashem, and therefore his not bowing doesn't allow him to answer because it doesn't allow him to communicate with them. That's the whole point. But eventually, that's only when he's in control. Then when it shifts to Esther and she's in control, then Mordechai is in fact over, but he's over the mitzvahs HaMelech, the real Melech. Okay, so now, let's see what's going on over here. So now what we have to understand is, what's the idea of this shift? In other words, if Mordechai originally is on this mission to reconstruct the Shivim Lashinis, and he's doing it, he's the Yehudi, now he gives it over to Esther, she's the Yehudis, she's going to be the one who's going to bring it back. What's that about? In other words, what's the question of whether the man will do it or the woman will do it? And now, if you look at the story, he told her you shouldn't be quiet, because if you're quiet now, then you're going to be lost, but the Jews are going to be saved. And then he says a very strange thing. Who knows if it's just for a time like this that you've reached your position of power, which is a very odd thing to say, because just because one doesn't know whether that's the reason is not a reason for a person to act. What's he telling her? Because we don't know, therefore she should act. So I want to point out another thing. Well, a few other things. Mordechai always knows what to do. Mordechai yoda es kol asher na'asa. And vayivodah hadvar Mordechai, when he found out about Bigson. When Esther acts, it's coming from a position of not knowing. Mi yodea. Okay, one thing. Another thing is, he tells her, we don't know how to read the times. Mi yodea la'is kazais. We don't know if this is the time that's supposed to bring you to Malchus. We had another place where we have knowledge and times, and that's in Parak Aleph, where the Yode'ei Ha'itim, those who know the times, are supposed to decide what to do with Vashti, who refused the king's summons, and now Esther, who doesn't know what time it is, or doesn't know how to read the ace, is going to come to the king unbidden. So what do we make of all that? What's this supposed to mean? What's the difference between Mordechai reconstructing the 70 languages and Esther? And what does that have to do with Miyodea? So I want to tell you what it means, Bekitzer Nimratz. Let's start with this. What's the significance of Da'as Ha'itim? What does it mean, people who know the Itim? What does it mean to know the ace? I think what it means is that there's something called Itim. Itim means that there are kinds of flavors of times that a person can tune into and have knowledge of, and if he has knowledge of that, he can run with the kind of time that it is. Okay, so it's a very astrological, almost magical notion, and of course, it's arguably not true Das. It's certainly not Das Hashem, because it relates to some kind of duality, that there's all different types of Itim, and you have to be tuned into them. So I want to say that Das Ha'itim is connected to Das Elihim Acherim, or Shivim L'Shainis. If the Shivim L'Shainis that are all jockeying with each other for primacy, then the best a person could do is know the ace. You have to know how to read the time, know where things are holding in the world, which power is specifically regnant, and try to tune into that one and ride that one. Okay. Now, I want to say that Miyodem La'is Kazais is saying, look, the fact that the ace is obscure, we don't even know the ace, that's Esther's time to step up. And let me explain to you why. Mordechai is trying to reconstruct the Shivim L'Shainis. And his attempt, his push, ends up in disaster. Something is very wrong. Something has to be done differently. So he has to do a different way to reconstruct the Shivim L'Shainis. What's the way that he wants to do it? What's the way that Esther wants to do it? His way is through knowledge. He's familiar with the Shivim L'Shainis, and he's going to use his familiarity with the Shivim L'Shainis to reconstruct a Das Hashem, a language of Yehudis. Esther is different. Esther is quiet. Esther doesn't speak originally. So Esther operates in a time of Miyodea. Esther operates without knowing anything. The fact that she doesn't know whether it's the right time for something, that's her great strength. Why? Because Esther, as the woman who's not Yodea, but instead is known, she's the Chaymer, not the Tzura. So she is even deeper in the darkness, deeper in the secret, instead of having some kind of grasp of the Shivim L'Shainis. And what Mordechai realized is that in order to reconstruct the Hashem Echad, you have to be you have to be not even have any das of the Shivim Lashonis, because if you do, you are basically starting up with Haman by working on his terms. Now, that's obviously very cryptic, and I have to think about it myself more, but I'll just leave it at that. So I want to just point out like this, that Mordechai insisted to Esther, since now it's time for you to operate. And as you mentioned, this corresponds to the Yodei Ha'itim. There's another ace in the Megillah, which is that Haman said, I'm invited to the party tomorrow, but B'chol ace asher ani royas Mordechai HaYehudi, I can't take it anymore. So his wife tells him, you know what? Make a tree, hang Mordechai in the morning. Hang him at dawn. Now notice that Haman too, originally, when he's plotting against the Jews, he looks for the right time. He makes a girdle because we have to ride the ace. But now, when he's so upset about Mordechai, they tell him to act in haste and make a tree, and that ends up being his downfall because he has a tree that he made for Mordechai, and Mordechai ends up being in the king's favor. Chavona brings up the tree at the party, and Haman is hanged on it, and Mordechai is reinstated instead of it. Okay, so I want to say that it's Haman's haste and not working with the Itim, which ends up being his downfall. And the reason why it didn't work with Itim is because it said, B'chol ace, that I see Mordechai. There is no ace that I can take this. So this is a problem that goes beyond the Itim. And that's exactly what Mordechai wanted to precipitate. Because as long as we're working with the Yodei Ha'itim, as long as there's different kinds of times, meaning to say, even if you can't say which God is the God, because there's all different types of gods, all different flavors of Lashonim, there's all different ways of working in the world, but you say, okay, we could at least figure out which one is Sholet at this time, so then we're still playing Haman's games. We have to get even deeper to the place where there's no das, there's Miyodea, and the way he knocked Haman off his ace is by doing something to Haman that he couldn't accept even B'chol ace. I think that is all for now. Yeah, truth is, if you have to take this back to the Eitz Hadas Toivera, that of course the Isha has a big role in that, but the man is the one who's Yedea of Adam Yoda as Chava Ishtoi, and the Isha is the one that's known. Esther is Karka Olam, of course. So, anyways, but we will leave it at that. So basically, just to wrap it up, what I'm saying is that the real mission of Mordechai here is to reconstruct Yehudis, the language. That's the punchline. He wants to get the language of the Jews back, which is Ruach HaKodesh, which is Nevuah. The way he's doing that is by putting together the Shivim Lashonis. There are two ways to do that. You can do that by knowing the Shivim Lashonis, that's what Mordechai does, and you could do that by being, let's say, affected by the Shivim Lashonis, which is what Esther does, as being a subject, passive subject, who the Shivim Lashonis run through. She's interacts with them, but she doesn't know them, and that's because she's Miyodea. So she's in the position of channeling the Shivim Lashonis back to Hashem Echad in a way that Mordechai cannot, because he's too direct, too overt in his approaches, and therefore he risks provoking Haman in a way that Esther doesn't, because she's so unknown, Miyodea. And this is why I put up a medrash pliya that when Mordechai said Miyodea, the Malachim said Eishes Chayil Miyimtza. What I meant with that was that notice that the woman of valor is always never found. Adam lo motza eza kenegdei Miyimtza. Isha achas b'chalei lo motzasi. So I want to spin that and say the woman operates best when she's unnoticed. Miyimtza, she's not found. So Miyodea is actually the key to her being the Eishes Chayil, who can affect things that Mordechai cannot affect, even though he's greater in a way because he has das, but that himself, that das that he has, puts him in a direct tension with Haman that she could avoid with her midah of Miyodea ibla Eis, kozais higat la malchus amin keni hirotzen b'kolev.